Let's go ahead and kick things off just because we have a robust discussion that we are so excited to bring you today. So, welcome everyone. We are thrilled to have folks from across Montana joining us today for this conversation between Thor Culverhouse and of Submittable and Will Price of Next Frontier Capital. So before we dive into the conversation today, I just want to take the opportunity to make a few announcements. So you've probably been getting a few email announcements about Montana Festival. Make sure to get your tickets now. That will be hosted here in Bozeman, May 14th through the 17th. We are thrilled to be bringing to you the Innovators Forum that will be hosting on the main stage at Montana Festival. And then we also, on the night of the 15th, have our annual fundraiser, Bourbon and Bruises, that we are co-hosting at Last Best Comedy. So I hope you'll join us for that. So, as I mentioned, today's conversation will prove to be a very cool kind of behind the scenes look of the story of Submittable. And I wanted to bring Philip Britton to the stage to introduce our two speakers. So let's hand it over to the chairman of our board, Philip Britton, to talk a little bit about the speaker series and introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Jenny. And thanks all of you for joining us today. Really, really appreciate it and love all the engagement we've gotten over the last year since we first started the speaker series about a year ago. It's just been tremendous. And I hear, people stop me on the street to talk about it, which is just phenomenal from my point of view. Hopefully you're all aware, Scaling Montana, we have a mission. We're a nonprofit, has a mission to make Montana the premier destination for launching and scaling technology businesses. We believe that by fostering a strong and connected entrepreneurial community, we can drive meaningful innovation, create jobs, and generate a lasting economic impact on the state. The Scaling Montana Speaker Series, which this is an installment, it plays a crucial role. It's one part of us delivering on that mission. We bring together founders every month. We bring together founders, investors, industry leaders to share their journeys, their insights, any hard-earned lessons that they've gleaned over their careers in building high-growth businesses specifically. Now, our goal is to provide candid, real-world conversations that can help entrepreneurs navigate all the different challenges that come with scaling a business. With that, today's discussion, we could not have two more instrumental figures in Montana's entrepreneurial landscape than the two gentlemen joining us today. And their partnership spans years. They've been key allies in each other's successes. And so we're fortunate to hear an authentic, hopefully unfiltered conversation between them. Leading today's conversation is Will Price, known probably to most of you, founder and partner at Next Frontier Capital. Will has dedicated his career to investing in high-impact Montana technology companies, and he's played a pivotal role in shaping an investment thesis that we certainly buy into, that bet on Montana-based ventures. With his background in venture capital, investment banking, and in leading technology firms, he's at the forefront of Montana's startup growth. And joining him is Thor Culverhouse, undoubtedly also known to most, if not all of you, who is the current CEO of Submittable, one of our bright, shining stars in the tech space in Montana. Thor is a seasoned leader with a remarkable track record of scaling companies and driving innovation. Thor's led no less than 5 organizations as CEO, including Submittable, which has evolved from a submission management platform into a leading social impact software company. And I've used Submittable as a customer as well and love it. And you'll probably hear about that transformation today. So without further ado, let's dive into this conversation. And please help me in welcoming Will and Thor. Thank you.
Everybody, it's really great to be here. I appreciate everything that Early Stage Montana is doing, and what Phil and Jenny have brought with the speaker series over the last year. Have been some amazing speakers, and hopefully we can live up to what you guys have done in the last year. But Thor, it's great to be able to talk to you about this in front of everybody. How are you doing?
Yeah, good. Good to see you again. Well, we spent a lot of time together, but good to see you.
Yeah. So the first thing I'd ask you is like, you must have something wrong with you. 5 CEO jobs, like
Yeah, I can't keep a job.
for everyone who knows how hard a CEO job is, that's amazing. Talk a little bit about your path to the CEO office to start. Set the context for people for how you became a CEO, and then what keeps bringing you back, to the role.
Yeah, I got sort of an interesting start right out of school. I was actually an electrical engineer. I was an analog IC designer right out of school at Washington State. Went to work for a company called Tektronix in Portland, Oregon, and immediately dove in and was working on my master's degree in electrical engineering. And about, I don't know, several years into it, I realized that while I enjoyed the work, I was more fascinated by what was going on holistically with the business. So I dropped out of the program, went back to school, got an MBA, and got tapped on the shoulder to run part of the sales organization, also at Tektronix. So I was there for about 9 years. And through some sort of circuitous pathways, ended up running North America for a company called Informix, which was a large database company that actually competed with Oracle for years. It's a long story. I'll give you the Reader's Digest version, but I found my way running some sales organizations. And sort of later in life, I thought, well, what I'm really passionate about is to actually run a company on my own. And so I moved the family to Denver and took over an early stage company from a founder that just raised Series A capital. We ran that during some really challenging times during the financial crash of 2008. Ultimately, we ended up selling the company to HP, and I worked there for a period of time. But I had the bug, and I ultimately left HP and founded a company. Ended up selling that, and just kept working my way through, and ultimately found my way back here to Seattle, where I'm at today, by the way. And 5 years ago, you and your team tapped me on the shoulder to see if I could come in and help out with Submittable. So yeah, this August will be 5 years at Submittable, and it's been an incredible journey.
I remember that lunch we had on the streets of Missoula because it was during COVID, and you had to drive from because I don't know if it was the height of the COVID problem. We couldn't really fly there, but I remember meeting with you, Michael, John, and Bruce, and having lunch on the street. That was a great start to a good relationship.
I remember that it was right across the street from Stockman, so I thought this place is great.
So one of the things we want to talk about today is this transitioning of leadership and preparing a company to go from that founding team, which all companies have by definition, to the point where they realize that for us to kind of to continue to expand, to continue to grow, we need to kind of transition beyond that founding team and be able to bring in functional experts, whether it's sales, marketing, development, and then of course at the CEO role too. That's a pretty traditional, I should say, transition for people to go through. You've also done it before when you've taken over from founders. You did it with Michael. Talk a little bit about how to recognize when a founder should step back and bring in new leadership, and what it's like to be the person who comes in to try to pick up the pieces and honor that founder's contributions, but then kind of make some changes that allow the company to continue its growth. So
a great question. And first of all, it's not a given that the founding team ultimately needs to be replaced. I mean, obviously, there's tons of examples where folks have scaled from founder all the way through some really large, successful organizations. Obviously, Gates, Zuckerberg, we could all go on for a long time. But occasionally you'll run into situations where the founding team maybe is more myopic in their overall focus of the business and are very strong technically, is one example, and maybe just doesn't have the experience of how to go out and raise capital, how to build partnerships, which are usually, especially in the software space, if you're going to scale a business, you've got to find some go-to-market partnerships. Also, the ability to go out and recruit new talent as you grow as a business. Usually, you've got to get a management team in place that's a scaled business just to that extent. So it's identifying whether the core group of people that are part of that founding team really have the wherewithal and the experience to grow to that next level, because there's just a different set of challenges from that early stage startup, largely technical folks, to growing, a business north of $100 million that has a whole new set of challenges. And so, it's finding the right team first and foremost. Since I have been through it a couple of times, there are some things that you need to be completely aware of. Usually the team that's in place, when I've been brought in the past, they have very strong emotional connections to the founding team, right? And you've got to be very empathetic and understanding of exactly, why that team is there, their accomplishments, and make sure that you can identify exactly what those accomplishments are and leverage them to the best of your ability. I think the other thing that comes into play almost immediately is one of trust. Usually, when I've come in the past, I'm the outsider, right? You bring in an outside team, a new perspective, and so the way that you work with the existing team and make sure that they understand where your views are coming from, what your experiences have been, and why you believe perhaps a different path is a better way. And that takes a while. You can't come in and immediately, rip and replace. It usually doesn't work. So it's one of empathy and it's one of trust and understanding each other. And it does take time. Usually along the way, I've brought in other members that I've worked with in the past, who also have credibility and experience and usually have been through it again as well.
For the sake of the people on the call that don't know, one of the things that expedited this transition was a health issue. Michael was suffering from colon cancer, which ultimately took his life, and so it was a very much a function, I think, of a couple of things that we needed to take care of. One, finding a leader that could step into Michael, just given his focus on his health, but also at the same time, I think there was a recognition on Michael, irrespective of his health, that whether it was formalizing go-to-market, building more scale around processes and operations, kind of bringing that best practice from going 5 million to 50 million that he hadn't been on before, that he was also looking for that help as well. But what was that dynamic given his health? I mean, it must have been unique in its own regard that maybe added a little bit more intensity to the experience or any.
It was actually quite emotional. I obviously got to know Michael quite well before he passed. Rest in peace. Great human. I imagine that many of you on the call here today probably know of him or know him personally. And he was a great human, which made it in many ways really sort of challenging, but also at the same time, he was such a good person and a good human. I used to fly into Missoula on a fairly regular basis just to sit down and spend days with him, picking his brain on various ideas or various people, so on and so forth. So, that health issue did bring a whole new dimension that I hadn't dealt with in the past, and largely one of emotion. But to his credit, he actually knew that he had not scaled a business at that level before, hadn't raised the sort of capital that we ultimately did, hadn't gone through some of those experiences. And so he was such a giving person and warm and open-hearted. He really embraced me. And I think that embrace actually allowed the rest of the team to look around and say, well, if Michael's got a relationship with Thor, then I think we can accept him as well. So it was really, most of the credit is really with Michael in terms of how the transition went.
Yeah. This concept of kind of hiring a professional CEO in is a fraught one in the industry, because for a long time, people, CEOs or founders feel very possessive of their creation. They worry about the culture changing. And we just went through it at Bridger Photonics, where Pete Roos is a great leader, spent 16, 17 years in the seat, brought in a guy named Ben Little. And a lot of that focus is about maintaining what is the best of what we are to get us to this place, with a recognition that there's a transition underway for a reason. And that reason, it's typically around the company's getting very complicated, and there's a lot of interdependencies across functions that make alignment challenging. How do you think about, or how did you, or do you think about kind of trying to preserve culture while making significant changes on how people work together, whether it's the business model, pricing, target customer size, you want to make some changes, but you want to keep the best of what's there. So what's that process like?
Yeah, that's really the hard part. That's really the trick, is to find out exactly what is working and how to embrace that. And, this is a people business. So at the end of the day, I tried not to make changes very quickly at all. Again, I was living in Seattle at the time and used to fly in. We were right at the tail end of COVID, but I was flying in on a regular basis. And it was really getting to know the people more than anything else, just to make sure that I really, really understood some of the dynamics that they were facing. And Michael did build a phenomenal culture. I would say that the one area that I really started to attack immediately was, and I see this a lot, actually, this is not sort of unique to early stage, late stage, or different founder types, is that at the time, Submittable just had, candidly, too many use cases that they were trying to chase with only a limited amount of capital. And so the amount of capital that we could put behind each one of those investments was not what it was needed to be successful. So it wasn't about picking a new course, candidly. It was about narrowing the course that Michael was already on. We had many, many use cases. And effectively, after I would say about 6 months of evaluation and spending time with people, we collapsed that use case to really about 2. I would call it 1.5 because they were 2 very similar, but it was in the area of grants management. And we really doubled down on that. At the time, it was only about 40% of our total revenue. But after we doubled down on grants management, and we brought in some new innovation right off the bat with some technical folks that were just doing a phenomenal job, we doubled year 1 and almost doubled year 2. And so it wasn't picking a new path per se, but it was narrowing the scope and the energy around a path that.
I remember, like, when you used to go to the website at that point, you'd click on solutions and there'd be like 40 different things that would pop down, because, you're like, yeah, we can. It's a classic example of the platform could do so many things. It was a workflow solution for submitting documents to bigger teams to make decisions with requests for follow-up information. And if you think about it, it really does cover almost all workflows across a lot of organizations. What gave you that insight into grants management? And maybe you can talk a little bit about where you've taken the company from what you found. I mean, you've more than 10x revenue. You've got, employee base is much larger. So it's obviously work, but what did you get your arms around to kind of make those conclusive decisions to say, look, let's narrow the product portfolio and really put our wood behind these arrows?
Yeah. So, I mean, at first, it's sort of an obvious statement that we had too many use cases, and I think everybody acknowledged that. So that wasn't, a sort of a monumental surprise. But to define which areas we were going to go after, I mean, the data was right in front of us. If you just decomposed all of those revenue streams that they had in the past and looked at the one that made up the magnitude of that, almost 50%, was grants management. But then also grants management was growing at a faster clip than any other use case. That coupled with what was going on with COVID, and there was lots of dollars going out through federal to state governments, and we had many state agencies that were already on board. It wasn't a huge leap of faith to say if we just double down on grants management that we were going to get the requisite growth that we ultimately saw. So the data was right in front of us. It was in our existing bookings around growth rate, and some market dynamics that were pretty obvious to me. Since then, let me back up. Today we have grants management, and we sell that to mid-market foundations. We sell them to state governments, but we are also focusing on corporations that have large foundations that are giving money. Those corporations think of that as sort of community engagement, but they also want to engage their employees around a social construct. And so we developed some new IP around volunteering and giving and matching so that we could tackle all 3 verticals, giving us a larger TAM, but still with fewer use cases. And that winning combination really allowed us to grow to where we are today. Along the way, and we'll probably touch on this, we also bought one of our competitors about 7 months ago. And that was a big catalyst to the success as well.
Just to give a little more specificity on the maybe take an example of a state project or a grants management project. Just let people get some windows into what those deals look like.
Yeah, so some of our larger deals were actually with various state governments. I'll pick on state of Minnesota, which is my favorite one. We'll heard the story 1,000 times at board meetings, but state of Minnesota had a $1.3 billion tax surplus that they wanted to give back to their citizens. And obviously they weren't going to distribute that evenly across all of their citizens, but they wanted to make sure that, various forms of eligibility, people got, a different amount of money. And so the state came to us and said, can you put together an application process and ultimately help us deploy that? So within our platform, we do the ingestion of applications. So we got, I think, 2.5 million applications, something like that, a crazy amount of applications. And then our platform will actually read all of those applications and determine eligibility. We also work with a couple of other vendors to determine if there's fraud, because believe it or not, in many of these programs, there's up to 20% fraud, which is crazy. So we would help them detect fraud. And then ultimately, once it was selected, there was an automated process to actually push the money to the individuals in the form of a check, an ACH, or in some cases, we actually distributed it on a Relia card with our payments processor, US Bank. And then we did the full reconciliation process. So those are, when you think of grants management, you think of a fairly straightforward process, but these are, rather complex workflows, and we're handling lots of money. And so they're also, it's actually good business for us. Those are very large transactions for the company.
Yeah, that was incredible. I mean, if you think about the average purchase price of the product when I invested, it was probably, and this is not a joke, $29 or $100. And you end up doing a deal that's tens of millions of dollars. It was a remarkable evolution of the capabilities of the company. And one of the things I think is fascinating about it is like when you start an entrepreneurial journey, you don't really know where you're going to end up. And and one of the most fun things about working in companies is just by smart people looking for opportunity, to your point, seeing the opportunity in grants management, seeing that opportunity where governments needed to get dispersed capital to people, money to people during the COVID experience, and then being able to attack that and get people aligned to go after those bigger opportunities. I think it's fascinating what you did with what you found, where you took it, and that deal is a great case study.
Yeah, and just maybe to go a step further, obviously with the current administration, there's this whole focus on fraud and waste and limiting federal dollars going out the door. And I often get asked the question, is that going to be a headwind for the business? And actually, what we're finding is that it's not, because we focus on that fraud detection and we focus on the distribution of capital to the right people under the right circumstances and the full reconciliation. So in an odd way, this has actually put us in an even stronger leadership position.
No, that makes sense. Talk a little bit about your Series C raise. So you raised $47 million from Excel KKR, and arguably one of the largest. It definitely is one of the largest fundraisers, if not the largest, in Montana history. Just for folks that are thinking about how to raise capital for their businesses, talk a little bit about how that deal came together and what it's meant for the business.
Yeah, so when I got here, if you remember, it was in August of 20, so just coming up on 5 years ago. And right off the bat, we were going through, as you pointed out earlier, we were trying to identify what are we going to be as we go forward. And that took, approximately, 6 or 7 months to really come up with that new strategy. And we were in desperate need of capital at the time, and we just tapped most of our debt. And I did go out and sort of early mid-21 and tested the waters. And I realized pretty quickly that we hadn't achieved enough success for that really sort of demonstrative Series C. So we became, very efficient through the back half of 21 and really focused, again, narrowing that focus on a certain set of use cases so we could show the type of growth that we were going to need to have to raise that Series C. And sure enough, it worked. But it took us, the better part of a year and a half. We didn't raise that $47 million Series C until June of 22. So we were heads down and focused again for the better part of a year and a half. But along the way, I continued to test the waters because I've raised a lot of capital in the past. I've got strong relationships with a variety of VC and PE firms, and we would continue to go out and test the market to see exactly what kind of performance they wanted to see to get the kind of capital that we required. So I stayed close to the marketplace. I stayed close to investment bankers. Obviously, I talked to you and your peers on the board, Will, to kind of identify exactly when we were ready to go. So we launched in earnest, sort of I would say the tail end of 21, and it took, the better part of 6 months to actually put that together. Now, our timing couldn't have been more impeccable because right after, the back half of 21, those capital markets really started to seize up a little bit as interest rates increased, and it was really hard to raise in the back half of 22. So we were glad that we got it done.
Yeah. Well, the most recent kind of big milestone for your business is that you've grown through acquisition. You bought a competitor called WiseHive, added a lot of capability, new products. Can you talk a little bit about your decision to grow through acquisition versus organic, the product development, and then how you went about kind of identifying the opportunity and then getting a deal done in this market?
Yeah, and as I referenced a little bit earlier, we tried to grow in the corporate social responsibility space by building out our volunteering and giving and matching IP. And it became, excuse me, it became pretty clear that while we had some pretty unique IP, we were a new entrant in the marketplace. We didn't have any customers in that space, and the growth rate in that particular area wasn't exactly what I wanted. Simultaneously, we're burning a fair amount of capital, and even though $47 million is a lot of money, we were tapping into that much more than I wanted. And it was clear to me that the markets were such that it was going to be a while before we wanted to rely on going out and raising another round of capital. So we really changed our approach and said, what do we need to do to become much more capital efficient? One of the ways the way that we decided to get there was to buy one of our competitors, because immediately we would buy some revenue, and there's some synergies that we took advantage of as well. But WiseHive, we competed with head on. They had a corporate social responsibility portion of their platform. They had a grants management platform. We would bump into them all day long in every one of the deals that we were chasing. So by teaming together, we had two subscale businesses that we glued together, achieved those synergies, and now we're, 55 on our way to $60 million, hopefully this year.
Yeah. What's really interesting, I think, is also one of the things that I've observed that we've talked about is net new acquisition, revenue acquisition has been really hard in the last 2 or 3 years for a lot of SaaS companies. It just feels like, if you can think about buying revenue and then being able to grow NRR, or basically net revenue retention on an existing base of revenue, that kind of, it's not so much that people want to get rid of the contracts they have, it's just that people are loath or very hesitant to make new investments in new applications. And can you talk a little bit about the difference between how you think about kind of growing an organic customer base versus acquiring new customers, and how that may have played a factor in buying revenue versus trying to?
Well, yeah. And in some of the other companies that I've ran, I've done both. We've had some successful years where we built out new IP and were able to go out and successfully grow it. But again, given some of the headwinds that you just faced, it became abundantly clear to me that if you have $1 to invest in organic revenue growth, or $1 to invest in buying a company that already has that growth, already has that reputation, already has some credibility, and maybe even some IP on the shelf that they haven't taken advantage of, which was the case with WiseHive, it was a much better bet. And again, especially in the environment where that cost of capital is so much higher. So it just made much more sense to go out and buy some of that revenue and buy some of that IP. And again, the good news is that some of the IP that they had on the shelf that they haven't completely exploited yet was actually quite differentiated in the marketplace. So financially, it was a much better bet for us. And 7 months into it, we couldn't be happier. The teams gelled pretty well together, a very similar customer base, and we're seeing the fruits of that labor already.
What's kind of fun about your company too is that when I first met them, they had one office in Missoula. And now you've got offices in Missoula, Bellevue, India, the East Coast. Talk a little bit about what it's like running a globally distributed team, and especially bringing companies together. We talked about the founder transition, but this is also another transition. It's a global business distributed now with different cultures and different heritages. And what's it like as a CEO to try to bring all that together? And how do you think about most effectively being able to do that?
I don't get much sleep. I've actually, the company that I ran years ago in Denver, we actually had about 150 people in India. And so I used to go over there every quarter. And so I got to know that culture pretty well. And I would say that there's just nothing replaces, being on the road and spending time with people. that's the only way that you really start to assimilate those cultures, is to really understand one another. So, and ironically, I'm leaving next week for India. I'll be there for a week. And so I spend a lot of time, and I go to Montana on a regular basis. Today I'm here in Bellevue, in our Bellevue office. And so again, nothing really replaces, being in front of the team and spending time with the team, getting to know them personally and getting to understand what they care about. I would say that, yeah, the cultures are radically different in a way between Seattle and Missoula and Indore, India. But at the end of the day, we're all people. Everybody wants the same thing. Everybody wants to, as I like to say, work on cool shit. They want to be heard, and they want to know that they can actually influence decisions with inside of the company. They want to know that they're working on something that has impact. And so if you focus on that, the sort of nuances about where you live, in my opinion, really don't matter much.
When you get a big company like that, you have to be careful about setting directions that are kind of consistent and not trying to change things too often, because the changes can whiplash people, but at the same time, you want to bring flexibility and agility to your business. How have you found as a CEO, trying to set kind of consistent long-term goals that people around the world can buy into and support, with also allowing you to be able to kind of exercise executive prerogative to say, we got to be agile here. There's got to be some flexibility. And how do you balance that between kind of stability and a set direction, and kind of agility and flexibility?
Well, you're right. It is a challenge in the sense that, a company, even though we're 280 people and, as I mentioned, 55 million, we're starting to get scale. We're starting to get much more predictability in our business, and therefore it's a little less chaotic or hectic relative to the rate of change in terms of our strategy. But there's still a fair amount of that on a relative basis to a larger company. I would say that the one thing that I work on probably more than anything in my role is one of communication. We have regular meetings with the team, including our folks in India. So I need to make sure that I get the time of day right so that I can get the whole team together. Everybody's hearing the same thing at the same time. As I mentioned, I go out to Indore on a regular basis. We run very, very structured quarterly business reviews. I have Monday morning staff meetings that take an hour and a half, and nobody ever skips it. And we're very diligent about what we try to accomplish in those meetings. So again, where we're at, we still, move our strategy around a little bit. But I would argue the most important thing is just one of over communicating with the team over and over and over. I spend most of my day talking with other people about what we're doing and where we're going.
Yeah. Well, you've been an engineer and a sales leader. That's a kind of a rare combination. For as you think back at, trying to give advice to someone who's maybe 20 years younger than you are, 30. Sorry to say it, 30 years younger than you. Who's an engineer or a salesperson who wants to have that kind of well-grounded general manager, kind of multi-sector, multidisciplinary experiences that you've had. How do you shape your career to kind of get out of that functional track to kind of learn about the other side of the business? Any kind of advice you'd give for people to how to think about doing that?
Well, ironically, I've got 4 kids, and one works at a nonprofit, one's a mechanical engineer, one's a salesman, and one's an entrepreneur. He just started a new company. So I've got the whole spectrum, right? And I tell them the same thing. At the end of the day, that there's not much of a difference between an engineer and a salesperson. You're solving somebody's problem. You really need to be curious, right? And so I would argue whatever track that you ultimately pick, you need to be extremely curious. So early in my career, when I was trying to make that transition from engineering to sales, I spent a lot of time with the general manager. I got to know him on a personal level, and I spent time with him, and I got on his calendar, and I tried to understand exactly what was going on in the business. I tried to understand the bigger picture. What were the problems that he was trying to solve at the time? I did that in various parts of the organization. And pretty soon I had probably a better sense than my peers, in particular for my age, as to, what were the challenges that the business faced, and therefore how can I align myself with them to go solve those problems. And I think that served me well, at least in parts of
I love that idea. It's curiosity and problem solving, in different disciplines, but the same.
It is. And in fact, today I really coach a number of people on my staff that are maybe, junior in their career, and I meet with them twice a month for about 30 minutes, and they have structured questions. They show up, they fire away. I get to know them better, and I really encourage people to do that. And so, like I said, there's 3 that I meet with today on a regular basis. And I could certainly do more. And I think that's just really important to the organization. It makes me feel good, and hopefully they get something out of it as well.
Great. Well, I really enjoyed that. Thank you. I'm going to step back and let kind of a Q&A happen. And so if people have questions, and Jenny may want to step in and help me here, just please, doors available to answer them. So.
Thanks.
Well,
Will.
first of all, I mean, thank you. That was, I could have listened to that all day. It was fun to kind of hear you to just go through the Submittable journey, and what a journey it's been in the last 5 years. It's quite remarkable to think that it's just been 5 years. So with that, how about these guys probably, I forgot to do just a little like introduce yourself in the chat. So let's just take a moment. Let's have folks like introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you're joining us from, and we'll just kind of try to queue up some Q&A. And while people are introducing themselves, I'll take the opportunity to take the first question. I'm just curious, like learning about your development of IP and going into kind of fraud detection and actual capital deployment. That's such a noisy space right now. How did you determine like the build versus buy, and are you building out your own IP there?
Great question. Early on in the fraud detection in particular, we actually leveraged some vendors out there that were already accomplishing this. And so it became an integration, which was, in my opinion, especially for early stage companies, again, limited capital, we've got to go solve a problem. You very often can't solve these problems all by yourself because they do take a certain amount of time, energy, and money. So early on, we teamed with a couple of different vendors to provide a unique capability around fraud detection. Now, fast forward to today, we actually built a partnership with State of Minnesota and Microsoft. In fact, State of Minnesota is going to be out here early next month. And we built a design partnership with them, leveraging Copilot and Microsoft's AI IP to detect fraud in a way that we don't see out there in the marketplace today. So now that we've matured a little bit, we're going to start to do that in conjunction with our partners. Another great reason to use your partners is because now I'm not fitting the bill for all of this work, right? And so we try to find ways to leverage those development efforts.
Awesome. Good to know. Okay, I think we've got a question from Billing. So Keith, go ahead and take it from here.
I had a question in regards to your funding and being in Montana, the balance of searching and seeking funding within Montana, but also what did that look like versus outside sources? So outside of Montana, when you were looking to build capital.
Yeah, so Will had invested. Will, remind me, when did you guys invest? It was long before.
Yeah, we invested in 2015. It's actually kind of just a good Montana story. It was at the University of Montana Business Plan competition. Michael was sitting next to me, and we think we closed in September of 2015. So that was Montana Capital. The next investor that came in was True Ventures out of the Bay Area. That was the first kind of time we kind of broke out of the state, if you will. And a guy named Punit Agrawal invested. And then Mike Smirklo from Next Coast Ventures from Austin. And then Excel KKR is kind of, they're a lot of places, but primarily California. So it was that first seed round that came from Montana. And there's some early investors too, like Montana Angels Frontier Angels had been invested earlier. But really, once we kind of got that seed round, everything from then on came from outside of the state, where there's just more capital available and people that had, our fund at that time was only 20 million. So we didn't have a lot of capital to support beyond our initial check. And then we were able to pick up, True, Next Coast, Excel KKR. And then we also had a firm called Greenspring Invest, which is part of Stepstone, which was one of True's LPs that came in. So that the short answer is almost 95% of the money's come from out of state.
Thank you.
And I
I think I'd piggyback on that, and this question would be both for Thor and Will. Thor more on the B2B side, and Will more on if you've got some very smaller companies on the B2C side. From a sales point, what are you guys seeing out there in the market as we're still in this kind of capital constricted, high interest rate world? What challenges are you seeing? How are you overcoming them organizationally, internally? Just kind of walk me through what you guys are seeing in the marketplace right now as we've got a number of businesses here that are on that path to expansion, and would love to kind of just chew on what you guys are challenged by right now.
And just to clarify, you mean very specifically from a go-to-market perspective and how we built out the sales channel?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when I got here, we did have a direct sales force, although, again, Will had mentioned that the ASPs were considerably lower. So it was really more of an SDR kind of effort, all telesales. As we grew into some of these larger state deals, it was pretty clear to me that one of the differentiated advantages we could actually provide was actually build out a dedicated sales force just for state governments. And so, where we stand today really quick is we've got a dedicated team on foundations, we've got a dedicated team on government, and we've got a dedicated team on the enterprise. It does tend to be a little bit more expensive when you go that route, but their specialty, their understanding of the solution, and their ability to have credibility in front of the customer and speak with sort of thought leadership was a huge part of one of the reasons why we grew. However, they are expensive. So I tend to try to leverage a partner model. So we're one of Microsoft's tier one partners for a group called Technology for Social Impact. And they sell almost exclusively to nonprofits. And again, we're a tier one partner. That part of our portfolio actually sits on Azure and not AWS. And so I go out of my way to try to build partnerships. Also in state governments, we built a partnership with US Bank that in that example that I referred to earlier, they were the payments processor. US Bank has 39 of the 50 states depository accounts. And so they were able to open up doors that we couldn't get to, even with a direct sales force. So whether it's a high cost of capital environment or not, those sales motions can be very expensive if they're not productive immediately. And so I do my best to leverage partners and other parts of the ecosystem to make sure that we lever those people up.
Yeah, I'd say the hardest thing I've seen, and this is not a new thing, this is probably 4 or 5 years old, is that traditional marketing is really struggling to break through to the buyer. You could use email nurturing, SDR cold calling, LinkedIn messages. There's just whatever your channel is. It used to be white papers, webinars, events. During COVID, it was really hard to get people to pay attention. You weren't sure they were at their offices even. Since COVID's kind of softened, if you will, and people are back in the office, I still think leads are very, very difficult. So it's put a lot of pressure on marketing to arm sales. If you think about marketing's job to help build kind of awareness and then very tactically drive sales opportunities, and sales kind of picking up those opportunities, it's that spend has been unproductive and very challenging. The partner model is a great model, but it's one of those chicken and egg things for startups. Partners really want to see some mass. If they're going to spend time on it, like Microsoft is such a big company, they really want to believe there's going to be a large amount of buyers for that. And so you have to almost prime the pump yourself before you can switch to the partner model. And the definition of what the prime means could be as much as 5 or 10 million in direct sales before a partner model is really even possible. So you have this kind of catch-22. No one knows who you are. Marketing's super ineffective. You can't get meetings. You can't get demos. And you have to drive revenue directly before the partners will pick you up and support you. And so it just puts tremendous pressure on the organization to try to identify how they can break through to the target buyer, resonate in a way that it drives engagement. And then if it's a top-down heavy sale, like an enterprise sale, it can be 12 to 18 months to get something done. So your capital's kind of depleting, you're running out of money. So it's a very hard nut to crack. And I think a lot of smart people are breaking their pick on it right now. In general, I think there's money available to get deals done, but it's people are very careful adding new vendors. And the amount of gauntlets you have to run as a young company to get through your master services agreement, cybersecurity reviews, SOC 2 compliance. I mean, there's so many barriers they put in front of you to be able to get access to the account. It is a non-trivial exercise. So thinking about your go-to-market, thinking about how you break through that noise and how you navigate that is really, really hard.
And I think it actually emphasizes a couple of points. It's one of the reasons why you can't sell 35 different solutions, because you've got limited capital. So you've got to put all of those resources behind fewer solutions. And then you've got to be a thought leader in that space. So you've got to be narrowly focused, and you've got to have credibility and expertise in the area that when you approach your target market.
One of the things I like to, it's not possible for every product, but if you think about, especially buyers, they're overwhelmed with marketing messages and all of it says they're going to solve all your problems. If you can find a way for people to self-qualify and self-demo and then engage with you once they know that you can solve their problem, it can be remarkably helpful. Like the ultimate model for that for me was open source software where you could download a package, you could run it locally, and whether it was MySQL or Linux or JBoss or there's a lot of open source technology out there now, even Facebook's Llama for working on AI, where people can get access to your technology and then engage with you once they have an opportunity to say, this is working for my purpose. What does it cost? And what are the rules of costing? But trying to jam stuff into people's, where you're just using marketing only to get through to them, it is really hard. So Submittable's early traction all came from was a credit card based sale, and people could log on, set up an account, self-provision. It was worked. And what Thor was able to do is take, thousands of customers and watch the patterns of adoption, and then really be able to lean into where the adoption was most acute around the biggest TAM, and then build a direct sales organization that went after those customers. But when you're starting from tabula rasa, I would think about how do you reduce the frictions to letting people self-validate and get and provision and say, this works for my purpose. Now, who should I talk to about it? It's a subtle difference, but it's hugely important to get qualified leads in the door.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of heads nodding and agreement in feeling the struggle there. So appreciate you walking us through that. I'm going to go to John Romano in Missoula. Looks like you had a question, John.
Yes, I did. Thank you. Question is to Mr. Culverhouse is, does he have any firm doctrine on proof of concept versus go-to-market strategy versus round A, round B? Is there any cadence to what he likes to practice being a CEO so many times? That's basically my question.
Can you be a little more specific?
Okay, well, specifically, I guess the question centers around proof of concept. This is typically a time, I guess, when most investors step in after proof of concept. But you can have a company, an organization, or a product idea that sounds great. And I'm just wondering if you had any thoughts around that, definitive thoughts around that. If you attach on to something as, good, what you think would identify as a good market and a good product idea? Would you wait till there's feedback from the marketplace on that? How do you approach that? Just generally, what's the...
Yeah, and I actually went through that one time a while ago in my career, where I actually founded the company, and we ended up selling it a bit later. And so I've been through that exact challenge. And I would say, with a phenomenal idea, and AI is all the rage. With a phenomenal idea, you can get an audience from folks like Will and others, but they get pitched on great ideas from really savvy people that have even done it multiple times all day long, every day, right? And so your job as an early stage founder is to demonstrate that you can actually see that commercial activity, or actually demonstrate that commercial activity is going to be successful. So a great idea very often doesn't get founded in and of itself. I will say, though, that, and I'd love to hear Will's thoughts as well on this, because it's really, you're on the other side of the fence here, but I can tell you what they look at. They look at not just a great idea, they look for commercial traction. The other thing they look for is, Do you have the wherewithal, the capacity beyond just a great idea to grow a business? Do you have a management team in place that understands these things? Do you really understand how you're going to take it to market and all the details we've already been through around partnerships or go-to-market strategy itself? So they're not just looking at the idea, the mousetrap, as I like to say, in and of itself. They're looking at your knowledge and wherewithal to actually grow a scaled business. Because at the end of the day, they're going to hand you, a pile of cash, regardless of the size, and you're going to deploy that cash in certain areas, and you have to demonstrate that that cash is going to yield some, predictable outcome. And so being able to tell the story is part of it, but generally not the whole part of it. They generally want to see demonstrable success along that commercialization front.
Yeah. I would just add, I think of venture capital and fundraising, it's very much like running a lap around the track. It's a baton race. Imagine you're doing a 4x400. The first lap is going to be run by the founder and their friends and family, and you have to pass that baton on to the pre-seed investor, the seed investor. The seed investor's got to make sure they pass the baton on to the A-round investor. So everyone's kind of thinking two things. What's the state of play at my time of entry? By the time I finish my lap, will there be enough independent value that we've created that a net new investor can come in and say, risk has been taken out of this business. I can extrapolate based on a set of variables that are well characterized. And this next lap, we're going to run faster based on what we just did. And so the mistakes we've made when we make an investment is that by the time we finish running our lap, we're out of energy, cash, if you will, and we haven't sold anything, And so the next investor is looking at us and saying, well, what have you done? It's the exact same where it was 18 months ago. There's no customers. The product's still in development. I don't know the channel of sale. I don't know the price point of the sale. I don't understand the ROI of someone who's installed and used your product. So when I think about capital formation, it's always about what are the risks we're trying to take out of the equation over the life of this capital. We think of it as 12 to 18 months. And what can we definitively prove to the market so that the next investor isn't speculating about the future? They're extrapolating based on a set of data that they've come to realize is true. So the danger with going in too early is that it may end up taking 6 months to a year to build the product. The product may be wrong, the feature set may be wrong, and you have no time to recover before you run out of cash. So we like to see at least one customer, because one customer is hugely different than 0 customers. They've used it, it's in production, they've seen value from it, and then you can extrapolate and say, okay, well, if we got 1, we can probably get 10. But the difference between 0 and 1 is really, really hard. So what I would try to focus on is, can you get handfuls of customers that are using your product in earnest before you get to that next phase, whatever that next phase is of capital. And we've got great people that have come to us with really good ideas, and we give them money. And at the end of the proceeds, there's no customers, and no one's willing to fund that because the risk is exactly the same as it was when we gave them the money. So then 2 things happen: either we have to put more money in, which is not what we want to do because we're just doubling down on our own. You're smoking your own weed at that point, if you will, or the company shuts down and everyone feels terrible about the fact things didn't happen well. So, I think it's really about understanding at each stage of your evolution, what will the next round of investors expect to see, and then making sure you achieve that risk reduction and those proof points such that that baton can be passed successfully from one investor to the next.
That's great.
Thank you.
Words of wisdom. Okay, next question. I think we've got time for just one more. And John, you're in the thick of it right now. So what question do you have for these gentlemen?
Oh man, only time for one. I actually had 2. So Thor, I might follow up with part 2 separately. Better question for the whole group. So I'm actually in a startup right now. We are selling to nonprofits. And Will, your last comment about trying to get customers in and kind of taking risk off the table, Thor, super curious about how you balance I can sign up, self-qualify, get on my credit card, which then leads to a secondary problem of potential churn, versus do you gatekeep, do more of the VC-backed model of trying to get people to sign an annual agreement, show that incremental month-over-month growth. So super curious, just like your strategy around that standpoint and how you guys navigated it.
Yeah, I think, they both have merits. Obviously, Will already pointed out the fact that if you can lower the cost structure and the overall barrier to entry for a customer by self-select, doing a self-demo and swiping, that's perfect. That lowers the total friction in the sales process. However, most of my career has been in and around selling to large enterprises, and they don't buy that way. So that's my own experience. They both have merits. I would say my experience has been, if you do crack the code on the enterprise, it can be incredibly lucrative. You can grow very fast. So again, we exited 20 when I first got to the company, and we were, I think, approximately just shy of $8 million. We doubled in year one. We doubled again in year two. And we could not have done that by that typical credit card swipe sort of mentality in the space that we were in. Others have done it, right? But the way we got there is that we built something very unique in the marketplace. We were extremely focused on our targeted approach towards that particular market. In this case, it was state governments. And we were able to demonstrate thought leadership. And so we were able to go get those larger contracts. Now, as it turns out, some of those states were a little more episodic because they gave away programs, so we still had a churn issue that we needed to deal with. But our approach was rather different and very exclusively focused on sort of the enterprise sales motion.
Yeah, super interesting. We're kind of balancing both right now. So we're selling storytelling as a service to nonprofits. So idea of even Scaling Montana will take this recording and go turn it into a bunch of bite-sized content. And so we have very small partners like Scaling Montana all the way up to large universities. To your point, they're never going to do like the credit card swipe to buy in.
Yeah, and I would say that, just in defense of our particular approach, again, I have less experience with the other side of the coin, but in our particular approach, once you've established that beachhead, once you've established that credibility, once you've got a sales motion that really understands and can demonstrate thought leadership, now you can start to sell more products in that same customer. And that's what we're doing, because over time, enterprises really don't want to buy from a multitude of vendors. They really like to buy a platform and work with a company that they can, effectively, have some influence over the product roadmap. And that's been our approach. And so we become a trusted advisor, and we can bring new IP into these relationships and ultimately have a really sticky, experience.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Great. A lot of wisdom. I think that's unfortunately all we have time for. Let's thank these guys for joining us and for giving us a master class in in really focusing your efforts and what that could mean for revenue and streamlining scaling a growth company. So that was fascinating. Thank you so much. We'll be back next month, and we'll have additional speakers for you. It's going to be a surprise to me in terms of who our speakers are. I'm still working those things out, but today's conversation truly was exceptional, and I'm so grateful for both Will and Thor for joining us today. And we'll look forward to seeing you all back here next month.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Thor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you,
Thanks,
Will and Thor.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
Bye, team. Thank you.
Thank you. That's great.